as we're all familiar with, how do we evaluate something, not just for ourselves, but something else that we're trying to figure out what's going on? Google search, who is, scan the box, assess, slam it in, and hey, profit at the end, right? There was only a couple of librarians that got that joke. So they set it up for me. I did the basics, threw it together. There was no patches, there was no hardening done at all. So is this a true picture of an accurate setup? Absolutely not. Is it at least a start? Sure. Because this is kind of the, base install that they give the customer and say, here you go, have fun. And a lot of times they sell their product to libraries that don't have a dedicated IT staff. Let's say for a college or a company. And it's not like the IT people dedicate their full time to the library. It's just books, who cares? So it's not a real good situation. And from my experiences and what I perceive from the company, they're not really doing anything about that either. And my opinion, it's not really a good situation. So what can be done? Well, real simple. A lot of these times they just put their server in the library director's office. Well, I'll just walk in, take the box. Hey, we got to go do something. Okay, cool. All right, no problem. And walk out with it. And then I just walked out with your whole library system. And it's not like you can just step back and pull out the card catalog again. So you've effectively just totally mudged up the operation of the facility. Possibly some SQL injection with some of the web pages that they have set up and the interactions with the CGIs. And then, of course, depending on the configuration, common or known exploits that nobody's bothered to patch yet or nobody's bothered to mitigate out. New 0-day stuff, but same situation as any other application or any other situation. And then you also have the social engineering or human factors, because librarians as a whole tend to be helpful and they tend to be friendly for the most part, unlike some of my ex-coworkers, at least towards me. So they're geared towards trying to help you get the information you want, and they don't think about, well, maybe I should kind of filter this a little bit and not give everybody the same user ID password, goofy stuff like that. And as a note, you have the hacking in a nutshell stuff and some of the fake O'Reilly books I put in the presentation. I had to explain to the librarians and the attendees that those were not real books. They're like, oh, can we get that? No, not really. Of course, since this box was not secured down at all, there was like a plethora of Sun issues with Solaris, because everything was open, everything pinged back, it identified everything. SendMail's the default config. The first thing I would do is rip that out and put Qmail, but that's just a personal preference. Now, specifically with the application itself, there's a possible buffer overflow, and I'll show you guys part of the response I got back on that. I'm not a bithead. I'm not a coder, so whatever feedback you guys can give me on that, that'd be great, because I'm interested in what it is. Anything that the system would have a problem with, it would report back errors in database types and giving feedback. So, hey, now I know you're on an Oracle database and you're running Apache this, and let me go to Google and see what problem, vulnerabilities there are, and you're giving them too much information. There was also no verification that it was an actual client that was allowed to access that database to talk. So, if I'm a particular computer in a particular library, that I'm accessing my own system, whereas I just happen to download the library client application and throw it on my laptop and go to some local coffee shop and start pinging your box, and oh no, I just figured out what the user ID login because somebody used password as password, and now I'm in your database in the same interface and application that the librarians use. So let me go to Google. All right, I'll Google the company name or the company abbreviation initials, the library application name, and then password. and I found a good dozen websites of, okay, this is the library staff support site. Oh, and if you have any questions about our integrated library system, here's the user ID and password for the support site, which is supposed to be close hold information according to the non-disclosure agreement you sign with their company. Yeah, the guys, and actually at this point I actually pulled a couple websites up. I'm like, okay, here's one, another, and I could see that the whole collection of the staff from the vendor in the back left corner just going, oh man. And one of them, like one of the bosses, is just writing down who they are. it was fucking hilarious, man. Oh yeah, it was hitting the fan. And then there's also some specific CGI file names, or CGI /1.1, which there's a CGI 1.1 vulnerability, if I understand it correctly. This is a bit of information that one of my fellow admins, sysadmins, passed to me from a different facility, and I wasn't able to do too much about that. But if they had not updated their site and Google had already cached it, there's chances are you go back to their library system, they still had that vulnerability. Blam. Going through a couple of different websites, web pages within this application, there's one where you can log in as a library patron and renew your books and do that sort of stuff. Well, okay, I'll go in the soc field and throw in some SQL and see what happens. And this is about as much as I was able to get with the limited time frame I had. It was getting the error message, and I wasn't able to do any more on trying to figure out what was really going on. But something was going on because it got the error message. It was my gut feeling. Plus, with the particular search fields and search codes, you could change the count number to change the search results to display. And it's really not supposed to work that way. And again, I wasn't given enough time to really research this more, and I would have liked to. And I'm also getting into a realm where I really haven't played too much in. But yes. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking of. Sorry? I'll get to that. It's Oracle. All right. So, simple port scan. What did I find? I tried to find a nice graphic on port scanning. I couldn't find. Hey, here's a picture on like some seaport. I'll throw that in. Simple basic stuff. Oh yeah, let's run FTP on the same box we're running the library server and telnet. Oh, and that was like one of the standard things when I first got into the community. Oh, just telnet into your box. Yeah. Yep. There is SSH. SS what? Of course, Finger responded back. Port 80, of course, because they're running Apache for the, when you go and do your search of what items, it comes up as such. Send mail. And a bunch of other little ports that really weren't able to identify themselves. Some of those are the library applications, such as port 7, the 700 series, 7000 series. If there were certain modules you could buy in addition to this library system, such as what's showing up here, the self-check. Some libraries have a system where you can go and check out your books or check in your books yourself. Well, if you don't buy the module, you don't get it. Well, that's not something they turned on or turned off, or default turned off, in my opinion, which is how it should be, when they did a base install. So it's still floating out there, and it still had a process, even though you didn't buy the module. Didn't make any sense to me either. And I wasn't able to research this bottom here, port 7075, in regards to what it's coming up with in that little NISO website on the end. Yeah. Ports galore. I never tried that. Good idea, though. Sure. So with all these ports that were not, identifying themselves, I just started telnetting into them and see what happens. And let's go to 7070, and I type in a bunch of characters, and each character that I typed in, or a carriage return, or a group of characters, would display a 0 on the screen, and to a certain point, it'd give me this assertion failed error. I'm like, well, one, a decent setup shouldn't be giving me an error. Two, it shouldn't be letting me telnet into a port that's not expecting telnet. Because theoretically, this is probably one of the ports that this application runs on. So why is it allowing me to telnet in when it should be at least authenticating, hey, I'm trying to connect you with a client? So it's giving me the assertion failed with a couple CPP. Looks like some C program code in there. And that's what it looked like. Get the little zeros and then give me the error, and it would terminate me. But I could immediately telnet back and get the same thing again. And again, I wish I had some more time to play with this and all this. I wish I was a little bit more smarter in how to do it, but I wasn't given the time. If you telnet to any of the lower ports, you get this Oracle error. I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. And back to them at the close of my presentation, I'm like, okay, here's in summary. Don't display errors to the end user. Hello, I shouldn't be getting that stuff when I tell it in. Gives us clues on what's going on that the end users don't use. Being that I worked in a government facility, there are supposedly directives that being a vendor and selling stuff to government agencies that you're supposed to be in compliance with, which they're obviously not, because they talk about some of this stuff in there. And of course, there are standard practices and code of practices. They're a good thing. You guys should be complying with that. Do you guys do the CMM? And they looked at me like, what the fuck is the capability maturity model? Okay. I really, actually, after finding all this out, I'm glad that I wasn't able to get a job with them, because I don't think I could work there. Because it seems so hairy-carry the way they did their development. Some pretty basic stuff in regards to, hey, don't be the low-hanging fruit, even though you're getting this product. And a lot of times when you work in a library, it's a committee that decided what library system you're getting or which one you're migrating to, and you don't have a choice on what you're implementing. So at least try to do it smartly. And I suggested some suggested reading for the future, Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll. One, because it's a pretty decent book, I think. Two, because my boss read it and then understood everything I had talked about for like the last 3 years. Second, I know how some people feel about Mr. Mitnick, but I wasn't able to talk about some things, and I figured, hey, librarians have actually heard of Kevin Mitnick and probably heard of the book. Give that something else for some fodder for them to read. I also thank the vendors, thanking you EFF to help me out, some of my friends in my clan and in Nebraska CERT for some of their ideas, resources, and so forth, and for my boss for her support and blessing for doing this, or my old boss, I should say. And of course, I plugged the EFF. They also sent me a stack of flyers, pamphlets, and some stickers that I handed out in the presentation, and gave them a little bit, hey, what's the EFF and why? So at the end of the presentation, I was like, oh, that's over.